And we appreciate you streaming in here early on a football Friday to Birds 365 with Mac, John McMullen, and Jody McDonald. And yes, J Mac got first look at the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles as a unit. About 86 strong, couple guys missing, but a whole bunch of players out there for Johnny Mac to get a peek at yesterday. And at least as long as you were there, the under an hour was an easy win, huh, J Mac?
Yeah. I'm never going to complain with Nick. Other people might complain, but I'm not going to complain. Yeah, get on, get off, baby. Nick Sirianni, God bless you, Nick. But 7-on-7s, no team drills. That's where the Eagles are. That's what they're going to do, and again, they deserve the benefit of the doubt because of how things went last year. So maybe if things go in a negative direction, we can bring that up. But as far as that goes right now, it's hard to argue with the way they're doing things. And they believe they're ahead of the curve, because time is so limited anyway. And maybe they are. Maybe other teams start catching up. We'll see how that goes as the years move forward.
Benefit of the doubt, free pass, call it what you want. The Eagles got it. They earned it. They're going to use it. And a limited amount of time out there on the field yesterday, but you did get to see a couple of things. It's the thing that I was most looking forward to was trying to figure out in some places, and it's the first day of opening practices, OTAs with media there to be able to see if there is, quote unquote, a depth chart in place. Just who would go out there first. Doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. Doesn't mean it's going to be that way opening week of the season. But you always like to note these things. You can't even do that 7-on-7. They don't go 11-on-11. So can you state to a certainty as to who the two starting linebackers are, who the two starting safeties are? Not really, because they're 7-on-7. What does a defensive lineup look like 7-on-7, Johnny Mac?
It's a back seven. So yeah, I mean, generally it's the three corners, the two linebackers, the two safeties. So you can get a little bit of feel.
So the defensive linemen are not on the field at all.
No, well, it was interesting. The Eagles, typically they're not, and 7-on-7s. The Eagles had an interesting twist. Essentially, the main football drills for everybody that probably knows 11-on-11, which is full team drills, 9-on-7, which is usually a rushing drill with the offense, having the 9. The Eagles kind of did a 7-on-9, which I had never seen before. They had two edge
rushers. They got Jalen Hurts, the almost MVP. He can handle 7-on-9.
Well, they were just, typically in the past, you'd have guys with, you'd either have trash cans set up to mimic rushers or brooms like Johnny Manziel days, but they had Nolan Smith and Janarius Robinson out there sort of pretending to rush, and then they would stop and then chase the play. That was their job. So, by the way, Nolan Smith, high energy guy, 40 yards down the field, he's running. He was basically out there for every rep because you mentioned there were a few more players missing than you noted. I counted 12, I think. And most of the edge guys, Reddick, Sweat, Graham, weren't there. Derek Barnett, obviously, still recovering. So, Nolan was out there basically every rep chasing things. And so he had, even though it was 45 minutes, he
broke out into a sweat, huh?
Yeah. He was working hard. So it was an interesting little tweak, but you can get a feel, the bigger point, you can get a feel for the back seven. Now, the Eagles deferred to their veterans. I talked about a lot at running back. I expected Kenny Gainwell to get the first rep. That doesn't mean anything to me because to me, it's going to be either DeAndre Swift or Rashad Penny. But actually, Boston Scott got the first rep. It was Boston Scott, Kenny Gainwell, Trey Sermon before they even got to DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. So, that's obviously not going to continue. Safety, it was Reid Blankenship and Terrell Edmonds, which I expect, first day at camp, I expect that to be Reid Blankenship and Terrell Edmonds. But I do think Sidney Brown's going to have an opportunity to compete, but that's later down the line. And linebackers, it was Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow, as we all expected, and they're going to be the starting linebackers.
Whoa.
Somebody else.
Time out, Philadelphia. Every position you just went down, the starting guy was a guy who was on the Philadelphia Eagles last year, except for safety, where they don't have anyone other than Reid Blankenship, who was here last year. So that's why.
Morrow and Edmonds. Morrow at linebacker, Edmonds at safety.
Yeah, that's my question. They do have a couple of linebackers that are returning to the team. We know Nakobe Dean, who is now not only the starter but wearing the dot.
Yeah, well, that's not a good sign.
All of 35 plays last year, but at least he was on the team. Morrow got the nod over Bradley and Ellis. Why?
It's not a good sign for those who don't want Nicholas Morrow. And not only that, Nick got the podium treatment as well, which is ominous if you don't want him on the field. It says more about the guys behind him than it does. Obviously, when we talk about Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell, even though they played. Sean Bradley and Davion Taylor were the second team linebackers. They didn't play last year. In the regular defense, Sean obviously played on special teams. So that is probably the difference. Kayvon Wallace didn't play in the regular defense.
The other guy doesn't look good is Kayvon Wallace for him.
Yeah.
That he's can't supplant either Edmonds. Well, Blankenship supplanted him last year, but and I know Edmonds.
Well, I don't and to be truthful, I don't think anybody, if anybody thought, guys like that were going to threaten for starting roles, they're probably, off base. Of that group, the only one who's in the mix would be Kenny Gainwell for significant playing time, even with Swift and Penny here. Even Boston, I mean, he's not going to play a lot unless injuries pile up or the Giants show up. He's not going to play a lot. So, but, where they could defer, they did defer. And there's certain guys that they have plans for. And they have plans for Terrell Edmonds. And they have plans for Nicholas Morrow, at least as we stand here today on June 2nd.
You mentioned Morrow got the podium treatment, and I saw the video after the fact. Again, I think if I were on the beat with you guys, one of the things I would enjoy doing would be debating and or predicting and or betting on who the Eagles were going to actually make available and put there on the podium for you guys to talk about. Do you read into it more than anything else that, Nicholas Morrow, Jody McDonald trying to get Patrick Queen here in the worst way from the Ravens? Chill out, because we're okay with Nick Morrow as of right now. You going to go anywhere down that road?
No, I'm not going to go quite there. As of today, like I said, if they had to play today, and luckily they don't, Nicholas Morrow would be the starting linebacker. Does that preclude Howie Roseman from trying to get somebody down the road? No. He's, last year, Anthony Harris talked to us a lot, and they picked up C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So, but, Anthony Harris, I think a lot of people don't understand. Like, that's how razor thin it is, especially at when you're a starter or a projected starter and you're not a special teams player. In other words, Anthony Harris was going to be the starting safety, right up to the eve of the regular season. Then he's gone. He's off the roster because he can't help on special teams. So if you don't win that starting job, you're gone. And that's sort of Nicholas Morrow is Anthony Harris at linebacker. Yeah, right now he's the guy. And nobody right here on this group, on this roster, is going to take the job from Nicholas Morrow. That doesn't preclude them from going out and getting Patrick Queen or somebody else who's significantly better, as they did with C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Do you think that, and I know they did some punting drills yesterday, but not
Oh, by
live.
the way, that was a squash match, to get my wrestling term in there. Aaron Cepas was Bill Goldberg, and Ty Zettner was a Mulkey brother, for those who know wrestling. I destroyed him. Now it's one day. It's one day in June. But for those people hoping Aaron Cepas is going to lose the job, he might lose the job, but he's not losing the job to this guy.
Ty Zettner did not impress.
No, squash match.
Okay. All right, and guys were out there and you're not covered, they're not hitting or anything else. But since you mentioned that, if a player who is potentially going to make the team, potentially going to play, but if you go out and acquire better, not only are you not going to play, you're not going to be here. Any groupings of special teams guys that you noted that you say, well, at least he's on special teams, that's going to help his overall chance to make the roster?
Oh, well, there's, their core special teams guys, and there's certain guys that are going to make the team. Like Ben Van Sumeren's the guy I'm focused on this year. He's got a chance to make the team as an undrafted player, as a special teams guy. One interesting tweak was Tyron Johnson taking reps. Like, people were hoping Nolan Smith was going to take reps at all ball linebacker. I'm not saying a lot of people, but some people. That ain't happening. Tyron Johnson was taking snaps at all ball linebacker.
Really?
Yeah. So they're trying to sort of create a position for him to get him on the roster because of his special teams value, or at least that's the hope. You can see that's the thought process. If that works, how does that affect Sean Bradley? Sean Bradley's got to make this team on special teams. I think Christian Ellis, he had the play of the day, a tremendous interception of Marcus Mariota. He's got some upside, but he's going to make the team. He's the third linebacker right now. And if anybody here is going to make some noise, I think it's going to be Christian Ellis. He's athletic. He's smart. He seems to have a feel for the game. So he could be somebody that surprises come the summer. But they don't have a lot of talent at linebacker. They just don't, with the exception of Nakobe Dean. And by the way, I think yesterday on the show, 110%. The
ding,
green
ding,
dot.
ding, 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 ding.
Nicholas Morrow let the cat out of the bag. Not that we didn't know it. Nakobe Dean's the green dot. And that's not going to change. The other thing Nicholas Morrow said, which was interesting to me, this is his 7th year in the NFL, and he's been here for 6 weeks, and he said he's learned more about situational football in 6 weeks than he has in 6 years with the Raiders and the Bears. This team is, Nick Sirianni talks about it occasionally, this team's obsessed with situational football. And he culls film and tape from college games and when weird things happen, and brings his guys together, his staff, and says, all right, how are we going to handle this situation? How are we going to handle this situation? I think that's one of the keys to the Eagles' success. They spend more time on situational football than I think anybody in the NFL.
And I think, sorry to interrupt, John. And we'll see which one to say if there's any kind of change, but we know the defense that they played the last 2 years, and the Fandio style being very heavy on communication and the like. If you're going to play that kind of defense, if you're going to play the kind of defense where you're going to try and keep the offense guessing until the ball is snapped, and you're going to try and hide certain things, like, you better understand situational football, because that's what that's all about. that type of defense that they played the last 2 years is all situation. You have to be on top of the situation. Otherwise, every once in a while when it breaks down, you get a what was 3rd and 30 that Dak completed last year in the Cowboy game. Yeah, it was a breakdown. They miscommunicated on the play. They situationally dropped that football. But that's what this defense has been all about. So I'm not surprised when you tell me, oh, they're hyping situational football, because that's how they want to play defense on basically a down in, down out basis. Did so with Gannon, and we expect the same out of Desai, right?
Yeah, we do. But, a lot of people run that scheme, as we've talked about ad nauseum, and they don't do it as well as the Eagles. And, people bring up, you can bring up 3rd and 30. You can bring up the Super Bowl, blowing coverages there. Nobody's perfect. I mean, but again, compared to everybody else, there's fewer blown coverages. And unfortunately, they made the mistakes on the biggest stage. But, again, you could watch some of these other teams and do it week after week after week after week. Good quarterbacks, bad quarterbacks, blown coverage left, blown coverage right. It's a big difference. Reid Blankenship was another guy who got the podium treatment, and he mentioned Marcus Epps and how important Marcus Epps was for this team from a communication standpoint. Another sort of underreported story, who's taken over that back secondary. You can talk about the corners. Look, Darius Slay and James Bradbury are such savvy players. I talk about it all the time, but one's playing left corner, the other's playing right corner. They can't direct traffic in the secondary. That's got to be a safety.
Yep.
And you no longer have, before Marcus Epps, it was Anthony Harris, a very smart player. Before Anthony Harris, it was Rodney McLeod, a very smart player. Malcolm Jenkins, very smart player, maybe the smartest of them all. Who's directing traffic on the back end? To be determined.
Right. As of right now, it looks like Reid Blankenship, who is 12 years removed from being a undrafted free agent who didn't know that he was going to be in the National Football League. So that's a pretty big step up in responsibility.
Eagles got him for $5,000, baby. 12 months. He's now getting the podium treatment. $5,000.
Good for Reid Blankenship. All right, John McMullen, Jody McDonald, you're back guys here on Birds 365. I see in our waiting room, it's the big guy, BLG, Brandon Lee Gouton from Bleeding Green Nation. He was there standing next to Johnny McMullen, hopefully close so he could block the sun. McMullen had the SPF 70 on and a big hat, but having Brandon block the sun for you.
BLG doesn't have to get in front of anybody. He can just look over all of us. He never has to.
Hopefully the sun's behind you, so that way he's doing the blocking for you. Brandon Lee Gouton from Bleeding Green Nation up next on Birds 365.
Do you stream on a Roku?